The line that stopped George Patton was buried near the bottom of an after-action report. Convoy movement resumed under command of Second Lieutenant Samuel Hart. That was all it said, no decoration, no praise. Just one sentence beneath a list of dead men, damaged vehicles, and missing cargo. Patton read the sentence once. Then he went back to the first page. Early March 1945, the hills east of Trier. A 12-truck column was carrying bridge fittings, radio batteries, and fuel forward for Third Army engineers. Dusk had turned the road gray. Rain had softened the shoulders into mud, and the convoy was moving slowly between a stone embankment on one side and a wooded rise on the other. The first burst hit the lead truck. The second cut into the command vehicle. For 9 minutes, the road became noise, smoke, and bad information. When the firing thinned, 2 officers were dead. The convoy sergeant was dead. 9 men were wounded. 1 truck burned in the center of the road. Another had rolled into a ditch, and men along the column were firing at every shadow they could see. The only officer still standing was Samuel Hart. He was 24. He had been commissioned less than a year, and until that evening, the largest crisis he had managed was a loading delay at a railhead. 52 soldiers were now waiting for him to decide what the road meant. Was it still an ambush site? Was it a casualty station? Was it a wreck? Or was it still a supply route? Hart understood that it could not remain all 4. So he made 4 decisions, not perfectly, but in the only order that kept the next decision possible. His first order was the strangest. He told most of the convoy to stop shooting. The men had been answering muzzle flashes, branches, movement, and fear. Every rifle added more smoke. Every muzzle flash exposed another position. Nobody knew whether the Germans were still on the ridge or already pulling away. Hart kept 2 Browning automatic rifle teams firing in short, controlled bursts at the last confirmed positions. Everyone else was ordered down, behind wheels, ditches, or stone. He was not trying to win a firefight. He was trying to end the confusion. Years earlier, Hart's father had supervised switching crews in an Indiana rail yard. He had taught his son that the most dangerous moment was not when a train was moving fast. It was when too many men believed they were controlling the same track. On that road in Germany, Hart saw the same problem. Too many men were making private decisions. His first task was to give the road one mind. His second decision was about the wounded. He did not place them in the nearest trucks. He moved them off the road first. Using cargo tarps as litters, Hart sent the 9 wounded behind a low stone retaining wall 20 yards back from the convoy. He put the senior surviving medic in charge and assigned 1 staff sergeant to record names, injuries, and which vehicle each man would eventually enter. It looked slow. It felt slow. But Hart had already seen what happened when men tried to load casualties while bullets were still striking metal. A wounded man placed into the wrong truck could be trapped by the wreckage ahead. A driver who did not know the severity of his passengers could make the wrong choice at the first road junction. Hart wanted the wounded protected before he made them mobile. The third decision was the one that nearly broke the convoy. The burning truck had stopped diagonally across the road. Its rear wheels were locked. Ammunition was not cooking off, but fuel was spilling beneath the chassis, and the shoulder beside it was too soft to carry a loaded vehicle. Hart had 1 recovery truck with a front winch. He ordered a cable run around the burning vehicle's rear axle and anchored to a beech tree above the embankment. The plan was to pull the wreck sideways just far enough to create a lane. The first pull failed. The anchor angle was wrong. The cable tightened, the truck shifted less than a foot, and 6 men lost precious time resetting the line. Hart did not change the objective, he changed the geometry. The recovery truck backed farther down the road. The cable was re-rigged lower. Men used bridge timbers from the cargo as skids beneath the locked wheels. On the second pull, the wreck slid toward the ditch. 9 feet of road opened. 9 feet was enough. His fourth decision divided the convoy. The 3 trucks carrying the wounded would turn west at the next junction toward a field aid station. The remaining vehicles would continue east with the bridge equipment and radio batteries. That choice meant Hart could not personally stay with both groups. It also meant the mission would survive the ambush instead of becoming another casualty of it. He gave the casualty group to the senior medic and a staff sergeant. He stayed with the cargo. Only then did he radio headquarters. He reported the location, the dead, the wounded, the damaged vehicles, the likely direction of enemy withdrawal, and the 2 routes his convoy had taken. He did not ask headquarters what to do. He told them what was already in motion and where support could meet it. The wounded reached the aid station. The surviving cargo reached the engineer unit before midnight. The road was usable again before a relief patrol arrived, and at 3rd Army headquarters, the report was typed, routed, and nearly forgotten, except for 1 line. Convoy movement resumed under command of Second Lieutenant Samuel Hart. Patton wanted to know what that line concealed. He was not impressed by the fact that Hart had taken charge. A dead officer had left him no alternative. What caught Patton's attention was the sequence. Hart had first reduced noise, then protected the wounded, then reopened movement, then split the mission, then and only then reported. That was not a checklist. It was judgment under pressure. Each order made the next order possible, and one wrong order at the beginning would have made the rest meaningless. The next morning, before the supply park had finished serving breakfast, a command car rolled through the mud without warning. Hart was inside a canvas maintenance shelter, checking a replacement manifest against the trucks that had returned from the road. Patton entered, looked at the paperwork, and asked one question. "Are you Hart?" Hart stood. "Yes, sir." Patton told him to bring his field notebook. They walked to the recovery truck. There was no ceremony, no assembled formation, no audience beyond a few mechanics pretending not to listen. Patton asked Hart to describe the ambush. Hart began with the firing. Patton stopped him. "Begin with your first order." So Hart did. He explained why he had stopped most of the shooting, why he had moved the wounded before loading them, why he had spent time clearing the road instead of abandoning the cargo, why he had separated the convoy, why he had waited to transmit until the situation had a shape. Patton interrupted only when Hart used a vague word. If Hart said quickly, Patton asked how many minutes. If Hart said nearby, Patton asked how many yards. If Hart said necessary, Patton asked what would have happened if he had chosen the alternative. The questions were not about bravery. They were about control. Then Patton asked the question Hart had not prepared for. Which order was wrong? Hart looked at the recovery truck. He did not say none. He did not defend the outcome. He pointed to the winch. "The objective was right, sir. The setup was wrong." Hart explained that he had anchored the first cable too high and too close. The angle forced the burning truck against its own locked wheels instead of pulling it across them. He had seen the cable, the tree, and the obstacle, but not the line of force. The mistake cost 6 minutes. One wounded man reached surgery later than he should have. The man survived. That did not make the delay acceptable. Hart said he would make the same third decision again, but he would make it from 20 yards farther back. Patton stood beside the truck without speaking. He had come to learn whether the report described luck, obedience, or command judgment. Hart's answer gave him something more useful. The young officer could separate a correct decision from a flawed execution. He could claim the first without hiding the second. Patton returned to his command car. That afternoon, a recommendation went forward to the personnel section. It did not praise Hart for heroism. It cited demonstrated command judgment, disciplined prioritization, and the ability to evaluate his own decisions after action. A second note instructed the assignment staff not to lose his name in the normal rotation. 5 weeks later, Samuel Hart received orders promoting him to first lieutenant. There was no explanation attached, no speech, no reference to Patton's visit. Hart folded the order, put it in his field desk, and returned to the convoy schedule. He finished the war in logistics. He did not become a famous commander. He returned to Indiana, completed an engineering degree, and spent most of his career designing safety systems for industrial plants and rail yards. People who worked under him remembered one habit. After an accident, a shutdown, or a near miss, Hart never began by asking who had failed. He asked which decision had made the next problem harder. Then he asked which decision had made the next solution possible. That was what Patton had seen in the report. Not 4 perfect orders, a mind that understood sequence. And when Patton went looking for the young lieutenant himself, the answer that mattered most was not what Hart had done right. It was the one thing he refused to pretend he had done perfectly.